They arrested me at my desk on a Tuesday morning. Detective Harris didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The handcuffs spoke loud enough. My coworkers froze mid-conversation, coffee cups suspended in air, eyes wide with shock and something worse, judgment. "Joy Brennan, you're under arrest for embezzlement and wire fraud," he said, reading my rights like he was ordering lunch. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the words that were destroying my life in real time. Across the room, Ivan Dmitri stood by the water cooler, his face painted with perfect concern. He met my eyes for just a second before looking away, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what was happening. That's when I knew. He'd done this. 6 months earlier, Ivan had walked into Caldwell Financial Services like he owned the place. Tall, confident, with a resume that sparkled and references that glowed. Our CEO, Mr. Anderson, hired him on the spot as Senior Operations Manager. Ivan would be working directly under me, learning our systems, helping modernize our processes. "Joy, this is Ivan Dmitri," Mr. Anderson said during the introduction. "He's going to help take us into the future." Ivan smiled warmly and shook my hand. "I've heard amazing things about you. I'm excited to learn from the best." I believed him. God help me, I actually believed him. Ivan was perfect. Too perfect, I realize now. He arrived early, stayed late, asked intelligent questions, took detailed notes. He brought coffee for the team, remembered birthdays, and volunteered for the projects no one else wanted. Within weeks, everyone loved him. He had this way of making you feel seen, like your opinion mattered, like you were the smartest person in the room, and he was lucky to work with you. I ate it up like everyone else. When he asked for temporary system access to review our financial processes, I didn't hesitate. He needed to understand how everything worked, right? I approved his credentials myself. The access started small. "Just need read-only permissions to review transaction logs," Ivan said casually one afternoon. "Sure, no problem." Then it was edit access to update vendor files. Then approval authority for small transfers. Each request made sense. Each had a reasonable explanation, and Ivan always framed it as temporary, just until he fully understood the systems. I signed off on everything. Looking back, I see it now. He was building a ladder, rung by careful rung. Each permission gave him one step closer to what he really wanted. But at the time, it just looked like a dedicated employee doing his job. The money started moving in April, not all at once. Ivan was too smart for that. He transferred small amounts first. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. Amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic fraud alerts but would add up quickly over time. The transfers went to shell companies with names that sounded legitimate. Meridian Consulting Solutions, Pacific Bridge Holdings, Greenfield Advisory Group. Every single transaction was logged under my credentials, my username, my access codes, my digital signature. It looked like I was stealing from my own company, and I had no idea it was happening. By June, the amounts had grown. 20,000, 50,000. Once, 100,000 in a single transfer. Ivan had studied our audit cycles. He knew exactly when internal reviews happened and structured everything to slip through the cracks. The transfers occurred during system backups when monitoring was reduced. They were categorized as vendor payments or contract fulfillments, normal business operations. The company lost nearly $3 million over 4 months. And every digital footprint pointed directly to me. Ivan had built the perfect frame. The audit began on a Monday. Our compliance team discovered irregularities in the vendor payment systems, transactions that didn't match contracts, companies that didn't exist, money disappearing into accounts that led nowhere. I was in a meeting when Mr. Anderson's assistant found me. "Joy, Mr. Anderson needs you in his office, now." Her face was pale, her voice shook. I remember thinking someone had died. I wish someone had. Death would have been simpler than what came next. Mr. Anderson's office felt like a courtroom. He sat behind his desk, flanked by our head of compliance and the company's attorney. Their expressions were granite. Cold. Final. "Joy, we've discovered significant financial irregularities," Mr. Anderson said slowly. "Unauthorized transfers totaling nearly $3 million. My stomach dropped. "What? That's impossible." The compliance director slid a folder across the desk. "Every transaction was processed using your login credentials, your access codes, your approval authority." I opened the folder with trembling hands. There it was, page after page, My username, my digital signature. Transaction after transaction. I didn't do this, I whispered. Nobody looked like they believed me. They suspended me immediately. Pending investigation, they called it. But everyone knew what it really meant. I was guilty until proven innocent. And in a system built on digital evidence, how do you prove you didn't do something when all the data says you did? Ivan was the first person I saw when I left Mr. Anderson's office. Joy? What's wrong? His concern looked so genuine, his confusion so authentic. They think I stole money, I said, my voice breaking. He put his hand on my shoulder. Looked me straight in the eye. That's crazy. You would never do something like that. This has to be a mistake. I actually felt grateful for his support. That's how good he was. I hired a lawyer that afternoon. Malcolm Hayes was expensive, sharp, and honest. He listened to my story, reviewed the evidence the company had shared, and delivered the bad news with brutal clarity. Joy, this looks terrible. Every piece of digital evidence points to you. Your login, your access, your approval signatures. But I didn't do it, I believe you. But proving it is another matter entirely. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They covered their tracks perfectly. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. Is there anyone at your company who had access to your credentials? Anyone who could have mimicked your login patterns? Ivan's face flashed in my mind. Maybe, I said slowly. I started thinking about everything I'd given Ivan. The access permissions, the training on our systems, the times I'd let him use my computer when his was updating, the passwords I'd shared for collaborative work. I'd handed him the keys to frame me, but I had no proof. Just suspicion. Just a sick feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away. Malcolm saw the realization on my face. If you think someone set you up, we need evidence, not hunches, not feelings. Cold, hard proof that someone else accessed those systems using your credentials. How do I get that? We request the full system logs, every access point, every login timestamp, every keystroke if possible. Then we look for patterns that don't match your behavior. It sounded impossible, but it was all I had. The police came 3 days later. I'd been expecting them, but expectation doesn't soften the blow of handcuffs. They arrested me at home, read me my rights, drove me to the station in silence. Processed me like I was a common criminal, fingerprints, photos, paperwork. In the interrogation room, Detective Harris laid out the evidence. We have $3 million in fraudulent transfers, all processed by you. Multiple shell companies, money laundering, wire fraud. This isn't a mistake, Ms. Brennan. This is systematic theft. I didn't do it. Then who did? I opened my mouth to say Ivan's name, but stopped. What could I say? He asked for access and I gave it to him. That wasn't evidence. That was stupidity. They held me for 2 days before Malcolm arranged bail. $50,000. My parents mortgaged their house to pay it. When I walked out of that jail, I wasn't the same person who'd walked in. Something inside me had hardened, crystallized. I'd spent 48 hours in a cell thinking about Ivan's face, his perfect smile, his careful questions. He'd studied me like a scientist studies a lab rat, and I'd let him. But if Ivan thought framing me would make me disappear quietly, he was wrong. I wasn't going to roll over. I was going to fight. Malcolm filed a motion for full discovery. We needed everything. Server logs, access records, IP addresses, timestamps, keystroke data if it existed. The company fought it, said it was proprietary information, said it was too burdensome to compile, but the judge sided with us. If Miss Brennan is being accused of crimes based on digital evidence, she has a right to examine that evidence thoroughly. Motion granted. It took 3 weeks to get the data. 3 weeks of waiting. 3 weeks of watching Ivan get promoted to acting financial operations director, the job that should have been mine. 3 weeks of people avoiding me on the street like I carried a disease. The logs arrived in 6 thick binders and 4 external hard drives. Malcolm and I spent days reviewing them in his conference room. Spreadsheets, access records, timestamps down to the second. At first, everything looked damning. My username appeared everywhere. Every fraudulent transaction carried my digital signature. But then Malcolm noticed something. Joy, what time do you usually arrive at work? Around 7:30, sometimes 8 if traffic is bad. He turned his laptop toward me. According to these logs, you accessed the system at 5:47 a.m. on April 12th. Then again at 5:52 a.m. on April 19th. multiple times before 6 in the morning. My heart started pounding. I've never logged in before 7. Never. We started flagging every early morning access, dozens of them, all before 6:30 a.m., all on days when transfers occurred. Malcolm pulled up my building's security logs, the times I'd badged into the office. None of them matched the early system logins. Someone was accessing the system remotely, using your credentials before you even arrived at work, Malcolm said, his eyes bright with possibility. Can we trace where those logins came from? We can try. He started digging into IP addresses. Most logins came from the office network, normal. Expected. But those early morning ones? They came from a residential IP address in the suburbs, an address that didn't belong to me. Malcolm hired a forensic IT specialist named Casey. She was young, brilliant, and spoke in code and acronyms I barely understood. But she understood what we needed. I need to trace the access patterns, Casey explained. See if there's a digital fingerprint that doesn't match Joy's typical behavior. She spent a week analyzing keystroke patterns, typing speed, common commands, even the way different users navigated through menus. When she came back, she looked excited. Whoever used Joy's credentials had completely different digital behavior. Different typing, rhythm, different navigation patterns, different command sequences. Can you prove it wasn't me? I asked. I can prove someone else was using your login, she said carefully. That's not quite the same thing, but it's close. We presented our findings to Detective Harris. He was skeptical at first. So someone else used her login. That doesn't mean she didn't give them permission. The IP address for those early morning logins, Malcolm said calmly, belongs to a residence in Greenwood Estates. Want to guess who lives there? He slid a document across the desk. Ivan Dmitri. Detective Harris's expression shifted. Just slightly, but enough. You're saying Dmitri framed her? I'm saying someone accessed financial systems from his home address using her credentials, Malcolm replied. Before she arrived at work, processing fraudulent transfers. You tell me what that looks like. Harris picked up his phone. I'll request a warrant for his systems. Everything moved quickly after that. Investigators seized Ivan's personal computers, his phone, his hard drives. They found remote access software installed, programs designed to connect to corporate networks from home. They found saved credentials, my username, my passwords, encrypted but recoverable. They found notes, plans, timelines, a detailed map of how to move money without triggering alarms. Ivan had documented his own crime. Not because he was careless, but because he was arrogant. He thought he'd covered his tracks perfectly. Thought framing me was foolproof. He never expected anyone to look this closely. They arrested Ivan on a Friday afternoon. Unlike my quiet arrest, his was public, televised, humiliating. I watched the news coverage from Malcolm's office. Ivan looked shocked, genuinely confused. He kept saying there must be some mistake, that he would never do something like this, that someone must have accessed his computer. The same denials I'd made, the same desperate confusion. But this time, the evidence was overwhelming. And this time, I wasn't the one in handcuffs. The prosecutor called me to explain what would happen next. Ms. Brennan, we're dropping all charges against you. The evidence clearly shows Mr. Dmitri orchestrated this entire scheme. We'll need your testimony, but you're no longer a suspect. Drop charges. No apology. No acknowledgement of the hell they'd put me through. Just a bureaucratic phone call and paperwork. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt numb. What happens to Ivan? I asked. He's being charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. If convicted, he's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. 20 years. For stealing my life. Somehow, it still didn't feel like enough. The company reinstated me with back pay. Anderson called me into his office, the same office where he'd accused me months earlier. Joy, we owe you an apology. We should have investigated more thoroughly before jumping to conclusions. Yes, I said simply. You should have. He looked uncomfortable. Good. We'd like you to return to your position, with a promotion, and a significant raise as compensation for what you've endured. I stared at him for a long moment. I'll think about it. I didn't want their guilt money, but I also didn't want to let Ivan take my career away from me. Ivan's trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified on day 7. Walked through everything. how I'd trusted him, how I'd granted him access, how he'd systematically built the framework to destroy me. Ivan sat at the defense table, expressionless. His expensive lawyer tried to argue reasonable doubt, tried to suggest I'd been complicit, tried everything to create confusion, but the evidence was too clear. The forensic data too damning. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Ivan finally looked at me. Really looked at me. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just held his gaze until he looked away. The judge sentenced Ivan to 18 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay back the $3 million, plus damages, plus my legal fees. Money he didn't have, money he'd already spent on the life he thought he'd bought with my ruin. After sentencing, Malcolm turned to me in the courthouse hallway. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. "Tired," I said finally, "but free." The weight I'd been carrying for months, the fear, the anger, the helplessness, had finally lifted. Ivan tried to erase me, to make me disappear into his crime, but I'd survived. And he was the one who'd disappeared instead. I didn't return to Caldwell Financial Services. I took a position with a competitor. Better pay, better respect, better everything. Mr. Anderson wasn't happy, but he couldn't exactly argue. 6 months after Ivan's conviction, I received a letter. From him. I almost threw it away unopened. But curiosity won. Inside was a single page, no apology, no remorse. Just one sentence: "I underestimated you." I read it twice. Then I burned it. He was right, though. He had underestimated me. Thought I was just another trusting colleague. Another easy mark. Another person who would crumble under pressure. He forgot that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who survive long enough to watch you fall. I kept the ashes in a small jar on my desk, a reminder. Not of revenge, but of resilience. They tried to end my life with my own name. They failed, because the truth doesn't stay buried forever. It just waits for someone patient enough to dig it up.